what was said yesterday, this U.S. Treasury Secretary, and the response from the head of Iranian National Security Council. Here is what Scott Bessent said: "We'll launch the largest financial blockade ever against Iran. Countries that continue trading with Tehran will become global pariahs." And the other point that he's mentioned, Washington will use its full power against any entity that fails to comply with the new sanctions. The Trump administration is urging U.S. allies and the rest of the world to halt trade with Iran. And the response from the Iranian Mohsen Rezai, he said, if the economic war continues, not a single drop of oil will be exported, neither through the Strait of Hormuz nor from anywhere in the Persian Gulf. I assume he's talking about the Fujairah and outside of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran will target any country's participation in or support for the United States economic warfare against the Iranian people. And they'll consider their behavior if they support the United States as an act of war. This is what's going on. The two sides are somehow preparing themselves for new round of, or the new phase, if we can say, of the conflict. What is your understanding on the way that the war is somehow changing its shape and phase in some, not in totality, but you see majorly changing its shape?
Well, we are staying in the same framework as the one we were into. That means you have the U.S., which started a war without knowing exactly what they wanted to achieve. And we see that because at the very beginning it was about the nuclear program with the so-called nuclear bomb. But we know, and that was already established, that Iran was not looking for having the nuclear weapon. So it was just about the nuclear program and the enrichment program, which is, by the way, fully authorized by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And regardless of what our media say, Iran has never gone beyond the limits provided by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So meaning that essentially there were no reason for the US to attack Iran. And that's the reason why, from that primary objective of the nuclear program, then the whole issue is shifted to the Strait of Hormuz. And now it's about the Strait of Hormuz, and almost no longer, even if sometimes Trump talks about the nuclear bomb, but in reality, it's all about the Strait of Hormuz. So we see that the strategic leadership of the US doesn't know exactly where it's heading to. Now, he wants a victory, but what is a victory? What could be called a victory? Having the Strait of Hormuz opened as it was in February, I mean, that means that you have spent billions of dollars for nothing. So is it a victory for whom? So we don't know exactly from the US side where they want to go. On the Iranian side, we know exactly where they are heading to, because in fact, this was the so-called True Promise 4. It means that the fourth time that Iran was attacked by both Israel and the US. And for them, they understand perfectly that if they don't have a very firm position in their response, you will have another attack and another, and that will continue. And even Israel has said that unless Iran is destroyed, there is no solution. So we are in a situation that is perceived from Iran as existential. Therefore, we cannot expect Iran to say that they will stop, because for them, it's existential. So they have to go up to the last stand, if you want. So In that configuration, what is strange is to see that the US has not yet realized that there is a point where you need to be rational and say, what do I want to achieve? Is my objective in relation with what I spend to reach that objective, which is essentially what you call efficiency. I am efficient in reaching my objectives, or is there any other way to achieve the objective with more efficient means? Just as an example, just as a suggestion, diplomacy or being in good relation. You see, why should I spend so much human life, equipment, uh, trust, because the US has spent a lot of trust, in fact, in this conflict, credibility as well, strategic, military, but also political and economic credibility. So, is the price worth it? Wouldn't it be more efficient to continue on a dialogue that started earlier this year, and which was ongoing in Geneva as the US started in the end of February their war? So the problem here, and again, this is a problem we have seen many times, not just with this administration, but also with the West at large. We started wars without knowing exactly what we wanted to achieve. We killed a lot of people. We spent a lot of money. We created a situation that forced people to emigrate towards the West. So we create a secondary problem. For what exactly? What did we really achieve? And that's, again, I'm back with that problem, is that we have a problem at strategic level in all our countries, not just the US administration. What we see today with the US is just the tip of the iceberg, if you want. But in reality, you have exactly the same thing with Macron, with Merz. All these people are exactly the same. They want to do things, but they don't have exactly an idea what they want to achieve, and they spend a lot of money. Their economies, their own economies, are crumbling, but they want to do something, but they don't know exactly why, what for, what's the purpose of that, and what is the cost of that. When it comes to Ukraine is paying the price for the others. Um, when it comes to the Middle East, we have a situation which is a little bit more straightforward, because, as I said, the US is spending money, spending its credibility, and spending all that. But at the same time, as I said, we are back into these wars that are essentially aimless. We don't know what we want to achieve. They spend a lot, and we are losing a lot. In fact, we are losing much more, probably not physically or materially, but we lose in terms of credibility, in terms of relationship, because that the West now seems to have completely abandoned diplomacy. So this is, in my view, an important loss from the West, and nobody really think about this. But if you look at all the different situations we have, it might be with China, it might be in the Middle East, it might be with Ukraine, it may be with Greenland, it may be with, take whatever situation. How do we solve this problem? With sanctions. You can add tariffs, but the tariffs are used as sanctions. They are no longer used as an economic tool. They are used as a sanction. And therefore, the key word in the whole international relation between the West and the rest of the world, the key word remains sanctions. And we're nothing else. This is the only way to solve problem, or to call sanctions on people, or countries, or state entities, whatever. But that means that we have absolutely no other way of solving problems. And when it comes to the issue of talking, well, we see that we have nothing to talk about. We don't know exactly how we want to address the problems. And that is exemplified with the question of Iran. We had an MOU that was signed on the 17th and 18th of June this year. But we can see that this MOU was not really discussed in reality, where we didn't have a real negotiation to establish this MOU. It was more or less a solution that was proposed by Iran, that was accepted by the US because they had no viable alternative solutions or solution. And therefore, they accepted that, but in my view, they accepted that with the idea that they would not implement it. Because few days after it was signed, well, everything resumed because you had then this blockade that was started by the U.S. and it didn't even wait for the 60 days before starting anything. He started right away. So meaning that they had no intent whatsoever to implement that. And we see that the whole issue of this MOU that was discussed between Iran and others. Iran discussed that all around with countries like Oman and things like that, as an example for the Strait of Hormuz. They discussed that regionally. So, meaning that when Iran came to the table with this MOU, it was already discussed by many actors. And that means that Iran had kind of was backed somehow by others because they had probably not an agreement, but at least they have informed the others that they would do something like this, and in a certain sense they had a backing. But the US never paid really attention to that. So we see that we are no longer used to the real diplomatic process that used to be that used to be used for solving conflicts that we had in the past, where you meet, you talk, and it takes time, and you meet once in Washington, once in Geneva, and so on and so forth. Meaning, it's a process. It's not just a talk, singular form. There are talks, plural form, and those talks are part of a process. And you exchange your views, as I explained many times. A real negotiation is that you have two parties coming, each one with its own proposal. Those proposals may differ significantly from each other. And the process is about bringing those two proposals closer and closer to each other, up to the point that you have a solution that satisfies both parties or insatisfies both parties equally. You have to be equally unsatisfied. And that's I said many times, that's a kind of a motto we had in the Swiss Foreign Affairs. We say a good agreement is when both parties are not satisfied. So it's another way of saying things. But that means that you have to make concessions, and both parties have to make their own concessions up to the point where you have something where you are satisfied with the concessions you have made, and that's it. But this process don't exist anymore. We have seen that even with the Ukrainian conflict. We had a few meetings in Istanbul last year and also in Saudi Arabia. But we see that these were one-time talks. You come, you talk, and you are unsatisfied, and that's it. Instead of taking the first talks as a basis for further discussion, you expect everything be solved at the first meeting. That's not how it works. You may need to have 10, 20, 30, I don't know how many meetings with people, with deciders, with people who can decide. But
Carl, sorry for interrupting you because what you're mentioning is the art of diplomacy, not the art of deal. The problem is
correct.
Donald Trump is seeking something else.
Absolutely. Well, as I said many times, even on your channel, I said the art of the deal is in essence what we used to call the gunboat diplomacy. That means you accept what I tell you, otherwise I shoot at you. This is the gunboat diplomacy. This is exactly what the great powers, Western powers, used at the end of the 19th, early 20th centuries. Exactly that. You say, okay, we want an agreement with you. That's our proposal. And if you are not happy, we send our navy. Exactly that. And the art of the deal is exactly that. That's exactly what we have seen with Gaza, exactly what we have seen with Ukraine. And we had, I mean, this is exactly the way. They come with a proposal, they put the proposal on the table and say, well, take it or leave it. But if you leave it, I'll provide more weapons to Ukraine. I will help Ukraine to bomb you, or things like that. And we have seen exactly the same thing with Iran and with the Palestinians when it came to the issue in early 2025 with the Gaza Strip. So we are in this. We have completely lost this art of diplomacy that I just explained, which is always based on human relations. Human relation plays no role at all anymore, unless today. And that's the sad part of all that. You have to hate people. We emphasize hate, and therefore you don't talk to people because they are the devil, the evil, whatever. So you don't talk to the evil. This is something we never had. This is a kind of vocabulary or terminology that we didn't have during the Cold War. Nobody was saying that Leonid Brezhnev or Gorbachev or whoever, Chernenko, Andropov, nobody said it was the evil. Because we had, parallel to what happened in Afghanistan or in Africa or in some other place in the world, we still had negotiation process. Even when the Soviets downed Boeing, a Korean Boeing, the KL 007, that was downed by the Soviet Air Force in the area of the Sakhalin, so in the far east of Soviet Union. We had this event. I mean, essentially, that was quite significant because all the passengers of this airplane were killed, in fact. Of course, it entered somehow the forbidden area, restricted zone on the Soviet airspace. Okay, you make. I mean, I don't want to go into the explanation of that. Regardless of the condition, that was still about 250 Korean who got killed in that event, and that was a major issue diplomatically. And I remember perfectly that was in 1983. Perfectly remember that. But the interesting thing is that despite this, we continue to speak to the Russians or the Soviets. Yeah, they had talks about even the incident itself. The Soviets were not just simply excluded from any discussion, and we had other discussions going on strategic arms limitation and things like this, and all that was not stopped at all. And even if, obviously, in the West, the Soviet was heavily criticized, and even if in the Soviet Union, by the way, there were also inquiry and all that because they were not happy about the incident. We have also to say that it was also seen within the Soviet system as a mistake. But in any case, this didn't stop the diplomatic relationship we had with the Soviet Union. We continued to talk to them. They were not suddenly the evil and all that, even if they had no free speech. I mean, it was a communist system with the gulag system and a psychiatric hospital for those who were not in the line with the party. I mean, it was a terrible system. But this never prevented us to have a diplomatic relationship with them. And that's exactly what strikes me today, is that for some reason, when you declare one country, can be the Palestinian, it can be the Iranians, it can be the Russians, when they are declared as enemy, nobody wants to talk to them. It's totally absurd. You have even more reason to talk to your enemy, if you consider him as an enemy, than with your, I mean, you can talk to your friends, obviously, but this kind of behavior. Well, you don't talk to them because they are stupid, evil, whatever. So you never solve problem, and you maintain the problem, and that's exactly what we have seen. Essentially, what we are seeing with the Iran, between the U.S. and Iran, is almost a 50 years dispute, and despite the fact that we had several agreements, by the way, between the US and Iran, in particular the Algiers agreement, that, by the way, where the US agreed not to interfere with domestic policy in Iran. And that was signed in 1881 in Algiers as a result of the dispute related to the hostages of the Tehran embassy. You remember when the U.S. embassy was, the people of the U.S. embassy were taken as hostage and things like that. So, and after this episode that lasted for almost 1 year, or more than 1 year, you had this Algiers agreement, and the US agreed that they would no longer interfere with Iranian domestic policy. Well, that's obviously not the case. So we have completely abandoned what we signed. We have completely abandoned what we were committed for. And instead, we have maintained a kind of a spirit and atmosphere of tension, a permanent tension, by declaring that Iran was the devil, the most evil country in the world. Well, today, this first place is disputed with Russia, but essentially, this is the same mood. So what can you expect? You know, we are like kids, and we keep maintaining this climate of hate. This is worrying, because it's also a matter of maturity, not just political maturity, but also a maturity of the individuals. And what we see today are people who behave like teenagers. We have discussed that many times already.